It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Monday, March 10th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that thinks it would be nice if they could win a game during this homestand.
Culture only gets you so far these days.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. I've been podcasting about the Flyers, the NHL, and hockey for a decade. I'm here with prospect expert and Flyers credentialed reporter for 19 years, Russ Cohen. To keep up with our latest episodes and Flyers news, you can find us at Locked On Flyers on all your favorite socials, and of course here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are going to get into the aftermath of the trade deadline, including what Danny Briere had to say about it coming up a little bit later in the show, as well as our nemesis of the week. This back-to-back, though, this weekend against the Kraken and then the Devils, I think, there's a certain amount of discombobulation after the trade deadline with new guys coming in. You're missing the guys that you traded away. But I think, the first step that they did was the right thing somewhat in terms of the call-ups, right? Because
Mhm.
we got Andre, we got Abels, and we got Lixell. And that's basically what we said to do,
Mhm.
right? Was to call up those three. The Lixell call up, we said it could have been somebody else instead,
Right.
but this was the right kind of guys to call up here. And then they put Andre in for just one of the two games. Like, they can't do that.
Yeah, there's a couple things. There's definitely a misnomer since a lot of people don't watch Lehigh and they don't realize that since they're not really playing any system that's close to John Tortorella's, when a defenseman comes up, especially a young one, there's big adjustments to be made. And so Andre didn't look good at the beginning of the game. He's probably not going to look great for a game or two. I mean, it's like you can't expect this guy to
Right.
come up and not make any mistakes. Because now, if I start grading guys on making mistakes because this is a quote unquote rotational thing on defense, then Travis Sanheim should sit out next game,
Perhaps, or Nick Seeler. I
or Nick
really
Seeler.
think because he's banged up. Like, give him a day, especially on
Hmm.
a back-to-back like this. It would have been much more effective to give Nick Seeler the day off because then it could give him a little extra time to heal up before the next game. But keep Andre in there because, to your point, he does have to adjust. And you can't put him in for a game and then take him out and then have him wait and expect him to be able to make those adjustments. So I was a little cranky about that for sure. And I just thought taking Cam York out was like the worst choice of anybody because he's been playing generally very well and being kind of a backstop here
Yeah, I mean, this game I saw, a problem, and I think it was probably more
against the
Sanheim's problem
Devils.
against the Devils. Sorry, I think it was probably more Sanheim's problem than his. But
Right.
when they crossed up a little, but yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't have taken York out. I understand he wasn't playing maybe his best hockey the game before, but again, if it's just a situation now where you're scratching guys or you're benching guys for certain stretches or you're doing this isn't how you develop. You're at the point of the season now where this stuff, unless you feel like it's going to matter great next year, in a big way next year, you've got to start letting guys learn a little bit. There is a point where it has to happen.
Exactly. And I think one of the things we talked about last week in particular was getting Jacob Peltier off the fourth line and move
Correct.
him up so he can be with a more offensively focused group. And it kind of goes hand in hand for me with the what are we doing playing Nick Delorier
I mean, I
question
want to be as
because
nice as I
it's
can be, but he can't move out there.
no, that's the thing is like he being out there is a waste and it also causes problems for Jacob Peltier's
Right.
development. And if Garnet Hathaway is still hurt and hurt for a longer period of time than what we know now, I would say that's doubly so because if Peltier is in there with Hathaway, I can live with that a lot more than with Delorier.
Yes.
And it's not like I think Jacob Peltier is this, offensive firepower star waiting to happen, but can he play a third line role? We need to know that, right?
And can you give him 12 minutes in a game and give him a chance? Like, can you put him with
Yes.
line mates that at least sort of match his skill level? I mean, he hasn't had that yet.
Right, and so I think it's just been puzzling what they're doing there. I think it just does not make any sense, and the Flyers have an open roster spot, so why couldn't they call up another forward and
Of
sit
course
Delorier?
they could.
It's just maddening, and I do not understand that decision-making process. I do think they are gonna call other guys up because they've said as much, but the
Sure.
way they're executing on it, I don't think is as optimal as it could be. They're making some good decisions, like I said, in terms of who they did call up. They needed to call up one more guy.
Yeah, I mean, the GM's, doing some of that, and then the coach won't play him, or the coach, cuts down the minutes in the game, or the coach, in like Michkov's case, sits him for a while because he made a bad play
Right.
or two, or he's too high up. And it's like, so in that instance, he didn't like it because a goal scored. But if a goal didn't score, if Michkov did it, he probably wouldn't do anything. And so, like, these kinds of things, I just look at it like this. I think there was a point, like I said, where that all went for good development and good team chemistry and everything. I think now John's starting to hurt things, and he's doing it in the opposite way. And I don't think he sees it.
I think it's possible. I think, there's some things he is doing well with this team and can be given credit for. So it's really hard because you want to give him credit for those things. Like I do think Drysdale is playing better
He is.
overall. And, he got rewarded
Hmm.
again with another goal. And I think that'll help Travis Konechny as well.
I don't know.
Get
I don't know if that's helping Konechny. I mean, I'm watching him how
It
he's
was a great
playing.
play.
It was a good play. It was almost offsides. I mean, but it wasn't. But
It wasn't.
but the point is, like, if it was, then we wouldn't even be talking about it. Konechny's doing a lot of things wrong in games, and
Yes.
somebody actually needs to talk to him. You can't just let him sit there and stew and say he'll come out of it. I don't think he has enough, because now there is no Scott Lawton or anybody like that to talk to him. So
Well, I know.
somebody has
I
to, though.
Right, and that's part of this trade deadline hangover, which I 100% think is happening right now with the Flyers because they lost 3 of the fun locker room
Hmm.
guys, very skilled hockey players too. I'm not,
Yes.
dismissing that, but 3 guys that were core to the relationships of this locker room, and we're gonna talk more about that next segment, but
Hmm.
I do think the energy of this team is affected by those moves.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, and John could say it wasn't the last game. He could say it didn't matter because that's what he hopes. He hoped it didn't matter, but it mattered.
It did. Now, the other big question for me, especially related to the Kraken game, the Samerson question,
Yeah.
right? Because since the break, he's 2-2-1 with an 847 save percentage, 3.87 goals against average in 6 games played. He got pulled once. Compared to his overall season stats, his save percentage is 889, so still not great, but higher. And he was under 3 for the goals against average for the duration of the season, but 3.87 in 6 games. That's rough.
It's rough. There were clunky times in the corner for him by, hugging the post. The Chandler Stevenson shot, the goalie has the edge on that play. Now, I understand Chandler Stevenson's good on shorthanded goals, but you have the edge as the goalie, and he didn't have the edge the way he played it. And, we all agreed, like, pretty much in the press box, like, if you make that save, you keep your team in the game. That's what a goalie's
Yes.
supposed to do. And he hasn't made that save in a while.
Right, and that's the thing with him, and Torts alluded to that, I think, post game, where you want your goaltender to make that one extra great save,
Correct.
right? And Ersson has not. You're
No.
right. He just has not since the break, and, you could explain away each individual goal, but you look at the sum total of the
Right.
play, and it's just not 100% there, and when Tortorella continues to talk about, well, we'll see, who we're going to play when Fedotov, I think, is playing generally well
He
right
is. I
now.
mean,
I
he's playing better. I mean, I think we all can can see that. He has his
Yeah.
moments, the time he fell down,
Sure.
okay, fine, that's him. He's just at moments he could look completely clumsy but still make good saves. And he can, because of his size, be completely clumsy like that and keep a puck out of the net because nobody can get around him if he just sits on it, for a lack of a better term.
Right.
But those things are
Right.
fine. But I mean, again, I think a lot of us saw this team, and Sam, we'll just say Sam in this part, break down late in the season last year with a lot of games and a heavy schedule. And the way John was talking about it, it sounds like he's getting more of the same. And it seems like the early return on it is that it's a bad idea and they shouldn't do it because they don't have to do it. And so that's another one of those coaching decisions that I talk about, that I say, I don't understand why he went out on a limb to say that. It was only a few days ago. I think they need to back off that.
Yeah, they do. All right. There's a little more to talk about with this game. I want to talk more about Travis Sanheim as well as the power play. We're going to do that and talk about what Danny Briere had to say about the Flyers at the trade deadline coming up next. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, and each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to keep you feeling fuller longer. I love the no shells varieties. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. I have a bag at my desk all the time when I'm working. And recently I had some friends over for a movie night. Instead of that popcorn, we had bowls of a variety of flavors. Everybody loved them all, but the chili roasted no shells and the Wonderful Pistachios sea salt and vinegar no shells were the biggest hits by far. So delicious and healthy too. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. Those little green wonders pack a protein punch. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. On tomorrow's show, we will be previewing the Flyers' next matchup against the Ottawa Senators, who made a big splash at the trade deadline. We're going to talk about that and where the Sens stand in the playoff race. Plus, it'll be Phantoms Tuesday. They had a 2-game road trip against Charlotte, and we will recap that then. Plus, we're going to answer your mailbag questions on the Wednesday show. So get those in. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com, send us a message on any of our socials, or comment on our YouTube channel. So, Russ, Travis Sanheim, we have talked in the past about concern about his ice time. You just spoke in the last segment about overburdening the Flyers late in the season, and that was a problem last year. Is it starting to be a problem this year? I think they had kind of tampered that a little bit for most of this season, but it's starting to creep back to your point where we saw Travis Sanheim get over 25 minutes in the Seattle game. And the only reason why he didn't match that number was because he sat in the box for 2 minutes at the end of the game against the Devils. And I think, given the fact that he didn't play great against the Devils either, like, are we worried about Travis Sanheim?
Yeah, because I think there is a mental and physical toll. We all forget about the mental part. You could get away with some of the mental stuff when you're a forward, but when you're a defenseman, you can't. Like that's really a much bigger mental game playing defense than playing forward. So I think both of those things are taking a toll on him a little bit. He played in the Four Nations, so that was like extra games when other people had breaks, and I think we're seeing it.
Yeah, I think so too. So that's, another thing to add to the list to keep track of with this team and what they're doing. And then, of course, the power play. I just like, what are we doing here? Like, if I'm losing my mind. It was just awful in the game against Seattle. Obviously, not much of a chance against the Devils, but the chance they did have did not go well at all. And, I think especially giving up a shorthanded goal like that, that's just not something the Flyers should be doing at this point.
No. I mean, I think it's hit the low point of Rocky Thompson's tenure because like it doesn't matter where you're ranked because sometimes there's these things float around different percentages. There's some teams having better years, but you're still in that bottom quadrant and now you can't even get good zone entries anymore. Like
Right.
like against the Devils, they couldn't even get into the zone. I understand the Devils
No.
are fourth in penalty killing, but they couldn't even get set up. Like it was embarrassing, honestly. It really was.
Yeah. So that is, always on the list
Yeah.
for us following the Flyers. And we're going to talk more about, the to-dos for the rest of the season now that the trade deadline has
Hmm.
passed. And, having those difficult conversations about the assistant coaches is going to be part of that when we talk about it later this week. So the aftermath of the trade deadline for the Flyers here, they have a very solid amount of cap space at the moment that
Hmm.
they've created here. They have the ninth most per Sport Track and 12th per Puckpedia. They calculate it differently, but I think in
It is a
terms of
daily thing, so maybe
it's
it's
a
because
daily
of that.
thing, and also they've had to pay the players that they've traded away that count toward the
Right.
cumulative cap at the end of the season. So I understand why it's
And we don't know
different,
about
but
Johansson yet. That's going to be another thing that'll
y
factor.
totally, totally. But, I think they're in good shape
Yeah, no, they're in
is
good shape.
the end result here. But they have no retained spots left for this year, but that's okay
Right.
because the trade deadline's passed.
Right.
But the question is they have one left for next year. So they can only trade away one player at the deadline next year with a salary retention. So that's just a little thing to keep in the back of our minds
Right.
when we
Right.
get into the next season. And they made a choice to retain on the Kuzmenko deal. So even if they had traded Ristolainen, they would not have been able to retain because they already used
Right.
that spot on
And
the
that's where they needed
Kuzmenko
a
deal.
third team. That's why I had talked about a
Yep.
third team for that.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. So next season they still have the Hayes retention and the Lawton retention will be
Right.
there too. So and there's still going to be some additional dead cap space
Right.
there. All that being said, the Flyers are now the fifth youngest team in the NHL.
Okay.
That's something they talked about, wanting to
Hmm.
turn the reins over. Briere said that specifically. It's time to pass the torch to these younger players. And so now their average age is 26.3 as the roster currently stands with the call ups that they made because, Lawton was older. He wasn't old, but he was older.
Sure.
And Eric Johnson was old in the
Eric Johnson
grand
was old. Nick
scheme.
Delorier is old, but okay.
Right. But Deloria is still on the team.
No,
So
I know.
even with
That's my point. If you got them
yeah,
off, they drop a bunch.
they drop even more, but they're still a
Correct.
very, very young team.
Yeah.
So if that's something you're trying to accomplish, he has done that.
Hmm.
This team is younger.
I don't get so hung up on that. That to me, because again, Frost and Farabee weren't old, so
No.
and so like I don't get hung up on that. I get hung up on age. If you're aging, if your whole team's over 30, okay, then we're talking something. Other than that, I don't get too hung up on it, honestly.
Yeah. So one of the other things that Briere talked a lot about obviously was going to be the Lawton deal because that was like the biggest move he made of the day. And he talked about how it was one of the most difficult things he had to do as a GM. We all know he
Sure.
was the heart and soul of this team. You looked at all the social media posts the Flyers did afterwards, like it was just one, stab in the gut after another,
Right.
honestly, and watching all the other players like repost it and with
Yeah.
little like tear emojis, like it was a lot for Lawton. It was a lot for the team, and I think that it's going to take a little longer than maybe some other deals would have it for this team to rebound from that.
Well, I mean, this should be the last of that. Like it shouldn't take any longer than this, honestly. And I do think,
Yeah.
a couple games to process to me is enough. Like you gotta my whole thing is you're at the time of the year now where guys are still playing for pay and guys are still playing for jobs next year. And
Yes.
honestly, and I don't believe this, but I am getting texts that fans are thinking the team has checked out. And I understand why they're saying that.
Yeah, I do to some degree as well. I think, the other question out there was, on the potential return for Lawton, and that the Toronto prospect that they got was somebody that they had on their list in terms of from Toronto, what prospects would they be interested in getting.
Yeah, but it wasn't like he was
Um,
first on their list. They
no.
no,
Oh, no.
no, no,
But they
no.
got the first round pick as well.
Correct.
So, you got to go down your list a little bit in terms of those prospects
Yeah.
if you get the first for a guy like Lawton. But that, he does need work
Oh yeah.
and so both he uh Gorbenkin and Giovanni Smith went directly to the Phantoms, which was the right move to make for those guys for sure.
Yeah, no question. I mean, at this point, Giovanni Smith is just a fighter, and I spoke to
Right.
a good Russian scout I know, and he thinks fourth line talent for the other guy and for Gurbankin, and I think he's probably right. But I haven't seen him enough. I got to see more. I only watched like one or two Marlies games this year, and I didn't see him at all with the Leafs. So I'm not going to be like everybody else and think that there's more there. I got to wait and see. But the first round pick was the main thing, so I wasn't going to kill Danny on that. Now, he gotten a higher prospect than that, then I might have given him an A+, but I couldn't give him an A+, and we talked about that in a previous episode.
Yeah, we did on our big trade deadline recap that we put out on Friday. If you haven't listened to it, you can go back and look in the feeds for that. And the other question, which we talked about in the previous segment about the roster spots, he was asked about how do they manage getting defensemen on the Phantoms opportunities with the Flyers when they have no spots. And Briere said that they would make room and that Andre would be there to the end of the season. They'll make room when other guys are ready, but the evidence is not there to suggest that will
No,
happen.
I mean, Andre could be there for the rest of the year, and he could get scratched half the games.
Right.
So what does that do?
Yeah, I know. I know. I think that's an issue. Now, as far as why Ristolainen stayed, we talked about that in
Mhm.
the trade deadline recap. They do value his play. I value his play, and
Sure.
I talked about if we were going to keep either Lawton or Ristolainen, I would say keep Ristolainen.
Mhm.
And the improvement this year is likely to continue into next year, and it could increase his trade value even at next year's deadline. So I think it'll be a good thing.
I'm not sure yet. I mean, it's not bad. I'm not gonna say it's bad, but I can't say
Right.
it's gonna be a good thing yet. We'll see.
Yeah, I think so. As far as the Kuzmenko deal, which I think puzzled a lot of people because it didn't give him enough time to
Right.
see what he was here. It was just a need and fit with LA and thought the value for a third rounder in return was good, which is also true. Both things can be true
Sure.
at once.
Yeah, both things could be true.
I think that, Briere is very consistent with how he talks about where the team is in terms of thinking they're in a good spot, in terms of process and progress with some of the younger guys. We talked about that a little bit already in terms of the guys on the Kate's line and in terms of how Michkov is developing, which I think is mostly true.
Yeah, I think it's mostly true. Again, I would like to just see, like, my big thing with Michkov is there's definitely a point where I think he is getting confused as to what am I supposed to do out here? And I don't think we're at the point of the season where he should have to worry about that as much.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that this is the time of year where you just throw that teaching stuff out the window a little bit and
Well,
let
he's
it
got to
fly.
build his confidence. Like you can't. It's hard for him to keep this continued confidence going. I'm not saying he has to win the Calder. It's not about that. It's just about him feeling really good about this season. I'm sure he's going to look back and say, "Hey, this was a great season," but he could have a lot more ups than he's been having, and I think he needs more of them.
Right, and I think what you do is you take the off season to focus on some of those teaching things
Yeah,
and develop certain aspects of his game and really get him coached and have him
yeah,
stay around and work on those things kind of one on one and then try and put that into play starting at training camp next year and then just
yeah.
let him fly offensively for the rest of the season and if he cheats and Flyers give up a goal, okay.
Right.
Honestly, that's
Right,
fine.
and you could tell him something on the bench, but you don't have to take away his ice time. I just think
No.
that's not productive at this point.
No, not at all. All right. Well, it is Monday, so we will have our nemesis of the week coming up next.
Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef prepared, dietitian approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's calorie smart, protein plus, or keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab and go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. Example, I recently tried their protein plus meals, and they were packed with flavor and kept me full throughout the day. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started with factormeals.com/locked on NHL 50 off and use code locked on NHL 50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's locked on NHL 50 off at factormeals.com/locked on NHL 50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box.
All right, Russ. So when we had our nemesis of the week last week, it was obviously pre-trade deadline. And so I talked about two things, that Scott Lawton Last Supper photo, which now, in terms of how I talked about it, that I was like a little 50-50 on if he'd actually get traded. So he was kind of doing it just in case. But now that he's actually been traded, it's more poignant, I would say. And then it was when we talked about it. I also talked about a Sorokin goalie goal that wasn't a goalie goal because it was just because he touched the puck last and it was really a
Right.
Stamkos mistake, and how I get cranky about those sorts of points being awarded to players. And you had talked about going grocery shopping, and that
Mhm.
there's been a lot of scuttlebutt on the internet about how it's not masculine to go grocery shopping,
Right.
which is a load of hooey,
Yep.
as you would say, without using profanity.
Mhm.
And you also gave some really excellent grocery shopping tips about how to use coupons effectively and how to price compare and all of
Mhm.
that. So, honestly, if you haven't listened to the last Monday show, go back and listen to that because there's some really good shopping advice from Russ there. For me this week, my nemesis is what I would call the dead zone of the rest of this season, which is this post trade deadline to the end of the season when you know you aren't making the playoffs.
Mhm.
And like, how do you use it most effectively? But also, as the Flyers, but also as viewers, how do we watch this team and get a lot out of it? Because I think there is a lot to glean from the rest of this season. And it's just changing your mindset in terms of how you watch these games a little bit. I think it's possible to do, but it's also a challenge to make that shift from, obviously you want them to win because you do. I
Mhm.
mean, you kind of academically sometimes want them to lose because you want them to get a higher draft pick, but really emotionally, if you're a fan of a team, you want them to win.
Right.
So I think like it's just hard to make that post trade deadline transition sometimes. So that
Yeah.
is my nemesis this week.
So my nemesis is going to be when shows, streaming shows, movies purchase catalogs from, musicians or certain songs from musicians. And I'm not talking about the amount of money that's made because they don't get paid enough. I've seen too many things about that. What I'm saying is a lot of times they're playing those songs and having somebody else do a remake of it and just murdering it. Like, I mean, tempo wise, like they just slow it down to a halt where it's just like, what is this song? Like it doesn't even represent. And I've just seen this happen too many times lately. And it's just my whole thing is just if you want to do a remake, do a remake. It doesn't have to be exactly like the original, but don't like slow it down 75% and just drag it out so now you don't even want to hear the song ever again. There's too much of that going on. I don't know why, and I don't like it.
You're so funny. It's interesting because there's absolutely a trend, and it's not really the music streaming services. That has nothing to do with it.
No,
It's
no, no. It's in these
it's
shows.
it's you're talking about in like
It's streaming
movie
shows and
and
movies.
TV.
Yes. It's not in
Right.
the services.
Correct. So there's a trend of doing that, of doing a slow remix, like cover of a
Right.
song to enhance the emotional beats of either a scene or in a trailer more specifically. And I've seen that a lot. And there are times when I love it, and there are times where I'm just like, come on. And a lot of times it's used in horror films,
Hmm.
I would say, to kind of enhance the spookiness
Yeah.
or the scariness of a scene. And so I think it does depend on context. I think sometimes it's used really well and sometimes it's
I'm
not.
hearing more bad than good. I will say that. That's my problem.
Yeah, I mean, so for instance, I'm not gonna say anything about the plot because it's too good a plot to spoil, but the show Paradise
Uh huh.
on Hulu,
That's one of
where
them.
they, like, the Phil Collins
Uh
song
huh.
"Another Day in Paradise," I
Yeah.
think it's fantastic. I think the
I
way
think it was
the
okay
way
for
it was
like
slowed
5
down.
episodes, and now it's at the point where they might as well just mime
Well,
it.
that's the name of the show.
They've killed
They
it. No,
have
no, I
to
get
they
it,
have to
but
repeat
it
it.
it
So I
seems to be
think
getting
that's a
slower and
situation.
slower. It's just it's torture. But it's not they're not the worst offender. I've heard way worse.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. I think it was used really well, and I think it's a mix. And I think maybe there's an oversaturation of the trend to a degree, but I do think it's a mix for sure. But, I think it's to each their own. Some of these covers are absolutely phenomenal and some of them just don't fit. So, I get it. I get being annoyed with it to a certain degree for sure, but lots to talk about with the Flyers this week. Tomorrow, like I said, we're going to talk Flyers versus Senators. We're going to have Phantoms Tuesday, and there is a bit of consternation about the end of the Phantom season as well. So we're
Yep.
going to get into that. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So let us know your Flyers questions on any of our socials at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail or comment on our YouTube channel. I'm Rachel. I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology on the same socials. SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen today. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast. It brings you the daily league wide stories that matter with local coverage you love. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day.